afternoon and welcome to this RSA Professional Development webinar series. I am Stefania Fiorentino. I am a teaching fellow at the Bartlett School of Planning at University College London. And my research looks at ways to reconcile urban planning and governance with a more inclusive local economic development. This webinar is organized by the Regional Studies Association, that is the global and interdisciplinary network for urban and regional research, development and policy. The RSA supports its members with latest research funding schemes, networking and publishing opportunities and spaces to grow research and careers. And as a response to the current global crisis, the RSA board put in place a number of initiatives to support its members. One is this webinar for professional development that offers sessions on academic publishing, networking skills, and career development. Then there is a second webinar series, which is the Regents Cities Industry webinar series that delivers monthly sessions by experts in the field of regional studies, science, planning, and policy. And finally, there is a new small grant scheme for funding that is available for research that address the impact of COVID-19 on cities, region, and industry. And you can find more details about all these initiatives on the RSA website. Now, just to let you know, this webinar will be recorded and it will be made available on the RSA Members Lounge later on. Now, if you have any question and you want to participate to the Q&A session afterwards, you've got a Q&A function just at the bottom of the screen. And today we are discussing how you can get your first academic job. So I think this is a timely topic given the current emergency. And I imagine it's concerning the majority of early career researcher and PhD students. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce today's speakers. That is Professor Martin Jones. Martin is the Deputy Vice Chancellor and Professor of Human Geography at Staffordshire University. And he had responsibility for research, academic and strategic planning, the student experience, and the SU Academy Trust. Before joining Staffordshire University in 2017, he was director of the White Rose Social Science Doctoral Training Center and professor of urban and regional political economy at the University of Sheffield. And he has also worked as a co-director of the Wales Institute of Social and Economic Research, Data and Methods, WISERD. He is an interdisciplinary researcher working in the broad area of society and space, and his current research that is funded through WISERD and ESRC is looking at city region building and the foundational economy in Wales and England. He is currently co-editor of the Journal of Territorial Politics and Governance and has been an RSA member for more than 25 years. During his career, Martin has been a member of more than 300 interview panels and has chaired some 150 of these, appointing a wide range of teaching, research, and professional services positions, spanning from the early stages of their careers to executive post holders. So I now leave the floor to Martin, and I look forward to hear about his tips and expertise on the topic. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm speaking to you from Sheffield in South Yorkshire, where it's not very sunny today. I also recognise that the title of this seminar, How to Get Your First Academic Job, is heavily flavoured by the current economic crisis. We are living in very unusual times, very usual economic times, etc. So I do appreciate the labour market is not acting in a normal position. So some of what I'm saying would be more pertinent to a more settled labour market. That said, though, I think I want to share with you today some of the top tips of the trade that I've been involved in for some 20 years in terms of how to get your first academic job, but also not just your first academic job, in terms of how to get academic jobs generally speaking. So lots of what I want to talk to you about is something that I've learned as a participant in interview panels, but also what I've also learned as an applicant for jobs as well. It is not always the case that the person with the fattest CV in terms of outputs and publications will always get the job. It often helps, of course, if you have an established publications profile, but it's not always the case. It is about the connections and the fit, and also doing your preparation and homework as well. So what I want to do today is to do several things. And can I ask Alex to share my agenda slide, please, Alex? What I want to do first is to talk about what are you looking for. Often overlooked in this debate is in terms of what do you want as a person applying, and key things to consider. I want to spend a few minutes then talking about the key components of the academic application, what I've seen and spotted in covering letters, in CVs, letters of reference, research statements and teaching statements, and how all that bundles itself together in terms of, thirdly, what to emphasise in your application. There are component parts in the application that is worth looking at and worth rehearsing in a variety of ways. Then I want to, fourthly, look at what search committees are looking for from my perspective, being on the inside of various search committees with academic colleagues in terms of what we look for in terms of our part. And I want to pan back and look at the bigger picture in terms of what are those sort of critical ingredients in terms of, I think, what could make you a successful applicant. And also I'll recap, I'll have a concluding slide that summarises the parts of my presentation. Alex, you can now remove that cover slide, please, thank you. So firstly, let me talk about, firstly, what are you looking for? So I think the first thing to ask yourself is, what kind of institution would you like to work for as an applicant? Is it a research-led institution, or is it a teaching-led institution, or is it an institution that combines research and teaching? Higher education is not a thing. There are lots of types of higher education institution, and I would do your homework in terms of what kind of institution you'd like to join, because those different institutions require different forms of application. Also, think about what parts of the country or countries you'd like to work in. Now, you might think that's a strange point to make, but I've certainly been interviewed for jobs that I've not gone on to accept because they're in a particular part of the country. I've also been on interview panels where we've offered jobs to early career researchers who've then turned them down because it's not in the part of the country that they want to work in. The problem is, if you do that several times, you can have a bit of a reputation on the circuit for rejecting jobs. So I would encourage you to have a serious think. Also, if you've got some responsibilities in terms of partners or caring responsibilities with children, etc., in terms of, it might involve a physical move for not just yourself, but for other people. So really think about what you're looking for, and also think about the place of where you want to work at the same time. Let that be the guide. I mean, in this current context, of course, a lot of this, is more attuned to normal operating contexts. Can then ask Alex to share my next slide, please, Alex. I secondly want to talk about the component parts of the academic application. And if we keep this slide there for a while, please, Alex. I want to talk about the CV, I want to talk about the covering letter, I want to talk about what a teaching statement is, a research statement, and also want to talk about references, about how you pick at academic references and referees, etc. And this comes together in terms of the essential components of your academic application. Alex, you can remove this slide, please, now. Thank you. So firstly, talking about the covering letter. Even to this day, I make mistakes on covering letters. I often leave them to the last minute. The covering letter is critical, colleagues. It offers you an opportunity to create an interest. Short, snappy sentences, introductory paragraphs are critical. The covering letter should summarise your qualifications, your interest. But also it should say, why are you applying for this job? Why this particular job at this point in time? So really, it should refer back to the call language. The call language. There are words to spot in applications when there's a job you apply for. Explain fully, and I can't emphasise this enough, explain fully how you fulfil the criteria, because shortlisting panels then shortlist based on the criteria. And if you can nail the criteria in the covering letter, I think it's really, really important. Covering letters are not just a single page, they're often 2 to 3 pages. It'll often state in the application how many pages your covering letter should be. Invest time, please, in that covering letter. That covering letter should also highlight the achievements that you've made in terms of demonstrating the achievements. What do you think is your USP? But also it should be tailored, I think, to the particular institution that you're working with. Is it research you want to talk about? Is it teaching? Tailor it to the circumstances that you want to work on. Next, I want to talk about the CV. CVs should be well organised and error-free. You'll be amazed how some people don't use spell checker or have grammatical errors. On a CV, it should have your educational journey, it should have your honours awards, it should have your grants if you've got any, it should list your publications. If you're a very early career researcher and you've yet to publish, talk about your conference attendances that you've made, the oral presentations that you've given in your department or your university or conferences. It's often overlooked. If you've not got that, if you don't have publications, people think, I don't know what to write here. Talk about the fact that you've been active on the conference circuit and given talks and presentations. Talk about your teaching experience. Talk about your wider, what's called service activities in the industry, the wider roles you play in the management of your academic department, etc. How to tailor your CV. You either lead it with research or you lead it with teaching. It depends on the kind of institution you're applying for. Okay, let me focus for 30 seconds on a teaching statement. What is a teaching statement? And I learned this relatively late in my career. Most people, when they apply for jobs, don't include a teaching statement on their CV. It's important you do. The teaching statement should describe your philosophy towards teaching, not just list your experience. I taught X module. How did you teach? Why did you teach? How did you measure effectiveness? What is your approach to teaching? How do you engage diversity in the classroom? Learners of different learning stages, diversity, socioeconomic diversity, different levels of preparedness. What is your philosophy of teaching? You should also discuss the courses that you could teach, and that's important, could. The fit of your teaching to the department in mind, not just what you've taught, but what you could teach, what you might want to introduce into a department that you're going to join. And this should include also how you see yourself fitting into the undergraduate and the postgraduate curriculum. Research statements are critical as well in terms of a job application. This should cover your contributions to date. It should explain to the search committees what you think your research achievements have been, but it should also include your future research plans. And I would probably encourage you to pick one or two priority projects that demonstrate your ability to think beyond your current piece of work, which is your current PhD. Often critical at interview panels for folk that get the jobs is the people that can move on from their postgraduate work to the next level, from your PhD to the next level. Also highlight potential sources of funding. You might want to tailor that research statement based on who you know and how you would fit with people in the department. Often bear in mind that you might not be talking to an audience that directly relates to your area. So you might have to pitch your research statement in a more general way. So for instance, if I was to present my work on economic governance, I might lose half the audience. If I say I'm a geographer working in political and economic areas and I work on political economy, it might capture a broader audience. It's about the pitch and the presentation. Next, I want to talk to you about letters of recommendation and references. You should warm up your referees in advance. I still get asked to be a referee for colleagues in advanced positions now. They often ask me to be a referee. I put it on my long list of things to do. I then receive an email asking me to provide a reference, and I don't have a copy of the candidate's application with me. So if you're going to select your referees, I would advise you to send them a copy of the application when you've made it, so that when you're successfully shortlisted at interview, the folk writing the references for you have got your application, so they can play off the words. They can actually echo back to the person receiving the reference, the key claims and the key contributions that you're making as a candidate. I would advise you to pick probably your PhD supervisor as one referee. If you're a very early career, it can be somebody who's co-taught with you. If you taught on somebody else's module, etc., or somebody else's course, they can comment about your teaching. But also, lastly, on referees, don't be frightened of using people on occasion outside academia, government and industry, if you've done collaborative PhDs or collaborative work, etc. Third, what to emphasise in an application, in terms of what to emphasise the bigger picture. It's how you fit the position, what you bring into the institution. It's your publication record, it's your existing research plan. Be creative and innovative at the same time. Be interesting, be innovative with your plans for teaching. Highlight your experiences and your capabilities. Other experiences, talk about your grant experience, talk about your awards, your academic awards are really, really important. Brag about your successes, but don't be arrogant. Be confident on talking about what your achievements are, but don't use the word seminal over and over again. There's a fine line between confidence and arrogance, colleagues, as you know. Fourthly, I want to focus on what I think search committees are looking for. So in my position, being on interview panels and chairing interview panels, what 5 things do we look for? Firstly, it's the perception of excellence by the wide spectrum of people who are on the panel. They need to know your excellence across all the criteria in terms of excellence. Secondly, they need to know that you're effective in your organisation and can communicate strong accomplishments, that you have a well-written, exciting research plan, that you have a well-written and exciting teaching plan as well, that you have great references on file, that your referees can talk with confidence about your innovation, creativity and hard work. So sharing your application with your referees is critical, so they can echo back the same things. In relation to your teaching, that you actually have a vision, that you talk about the philosophy of your teaching, that you talk about your teaching reaching different parts of the university. Talk about the courses that you might want to co-teach with the existing members of the department that you're going to join, because that excites them in a variety of ways. But also talk about integration, how your research and your teaching integrates with the department you want to join. Talk about the fact where those existing research and teaching areas are and the value that you can add in a variety of ways. Fifthly, before my concluding slide, I want to talk about the bigger picture. What is the bigger picture, the message that I'm trying to convey to you in a shorter period of time? Read the call for applications and applicants carefully. Job calls have in them sentences that clearly highlight what an institution is looking for. Often there's weasel words in terms of what to spot. They may contain keys to what you're looking for and also how to play that back in your covering letter. Thoroughly do your homework on the department and the school that you're going to join. You might get asked, which of my colleagues would you like to work with? I was in an interview only 5 or so years ago when I was asked who would I work with, and I mentioned somebody who wasn't even in the department. I got it wrong. I was in the right institution, thankfully, but I didn't do my homework in terms of knowing what the existing faculty and staff research and teaching interests were and how I would dovetail and also contribute and also build capacity. So think about who you would want to work with in that department, in that faculty or school or within that university. Create those connections. It's really, really important that you do your homework. I would advise you to submit a few well-targeted applications that are well prepared, that place you in the places that you want to work, rather than sending out masses of applications. Folk that send out massive applications often leave the name of the other institution that you've applied for in the application. I've been on selection panels where somebody's actually used an application from another university and left that university's name in, which, as you can appreciate, colleagues, can be highly embarrassing. Alex, can you put my final slide up, please? To recap, in terms of my short contribution to you today, I want to just highlight what I've just said in terms of the high-level summary. What are you looking for? You know, always think about what kind of institution and what kind of place you want to be in. Application components. Mark this down. CV, covering letter, teaching statement, research statements, referees. Thirdly, what to emphasise in your application. How you fit, how you contribute. What is your publication record? Why are your research plans exciting? Why is your teaching innovative and interesting? What is your teaching philosophy? What other experiences do you have in terms of grants and workshops? Brag about your successes, but do it with confidence, not arrogance. What are search committees looking for? Perception of excellence across the board. Effective organisation that clearly conveys, etc. Great references. Work with your referees, although they are independent, of course, in the same way. Share everything with them. Be exciting, have a vision, have a philosophy for research and teaching. Even in research-led intensive institutions, talk about teaching. It might make the difference, because there are folk on that interview panel that won't understand your research or be fully aware of that research. Talk about teaching as well. Talk about integration, talk about how you connect. Don't forget that bigger picture, colleague. Read the call for applications carefully. Do your homework on the faculty, the school, the department, and the university. And that's the end of my presentation, colleagues. If you want to keep in touch with me, I'm on Twitter at Spatialityjones. if you want to ask me any questions that we can't cover in the time today. I'm a colleague of the Regional Studies Association for 25 plus years. We're part of an active network, and I'm here with Regional Studies staff to assist you in your careers as much as I can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, for your insightful presentation. I'm sorry there were some sound issues before, so hopefully it will go better now with the headset. Those are the joys of webinars. So we received already quite some interesting questions. So I'd like to start with the first one that refers to how would you deal, Martin, with having very long CVs, academic CVs are very long, and what really is read on it. So how would you deal with the things that are in progress, like manuscripts, things that are not published yet, and would you include them on a CV, and how?
I think it depends what stage you're at. I think it's important to put things that are under review. What I wouldn't do is to have a huge section of the CV that has things that you're going to write in the next year and be unrealistic. I've seen CVs that claim you're going to submit 10 articles in a year. So I think to be realistic on what the time frame is. If things are under review or in the stages of approval, put them in. If you've had something that's revised and resubmit, include that on the CV because it's often got through the first stage. Be honest. I've seen lots of CVs where people list half a page of stuff that's, quote, in press because they think it's been accepted. And then, of course, because you're dealing with interview panel people that might know people on journals, they can challenge the fact that it's been in press, etc. So I think just be strategic in terms of that. Don't claim you can do everything at once. If you've not written anything on this, if there's nothing on your CV and you claim you're going to submit 10 journal articles, I think just be practical and be factually accurate as well is my advice to you in that context. I don't think it's an issue of being unprofessional. It's a case of being factually accurate where you can be.
And going back to this CV issue and to how the CV is tailored on the job profile as well, there's a question on how would you deal with what is desirable and what is essential, basically, in an application. And if you are an early career and you don't meet all the criteria, how do you address, basically, the desirable items that you're not meeting?
I think that's not the issue with the CV. I think it's the crafting of the covering letter. I think the covering letter can clearly state how you meet the various criteria, which are, as you correctly highlighted, bracketed often into desirable and essential. Focus on the positivities, not on the negativities. If you are meeting lots of the desirable criteria, then state that in a variety of ways. It's up to the panel to, I think, to highlight where you don't meet the criteria, don't actually do that job for them. So I think the covering letter is a place where essential and desirable criteria will be looked at. Often if interview panels are dealing with 40 to 50 applicants and they're shortlisting very, very quickly, they'll often not get beyond the CV. They'll often go for the covering letter first. So, quite clearly on in that first page of that covering letter states how you meet the various criteria that are being advertised.
Yeah. And there are a lot of questions also addressing the COVID-19 emergency and how the job market will change or might change in the next few years for university, which is also a question I'd like to ask you. And in relation to that, there are a number of questions addressing how mobility might change and how, you apply to a job in a different country in these current times, and also linked to that, but not to the COVID-19 crisis, how do you suggest applying to jobs in different countries where you're less familiar with the higher education context? So I piled up different questions so that you can answer all of them because they're running out of time.
I will answer what I can do, because there's also the frank reality of the fact that there might not be lots of jobs in higher education, and people might have to look for jobs outside higher education and applied research areas until the HE market reinflates itself. Very difficult to predict where the job opportunities are going to be. All I will say is that the right fit for posts, certainly in the postdoctoral area, if you're working in an area, you could be required to relocate geographically, and that will be a strength I've often hired postdoctoral researchers who are from different institutions in different countries because of these thematic fits. So the current labour market might require some hypermobility, but in that context, thinking about the places that you want to work in is critical. I wouldn't. I think one thing you might predict is more virtual working in the kind of the postdoctoral market and certain elements of early career. If you're given a light teaching load, you might have some relative ease of working remotely. And again, it's very difficult to predict what these are. But I think if I was entering the labour market as an early career researcher at the minute, I would expect a lot of hyper volatility. I would focus on the need, I think, to nail what my teaching philosophy is, but also to nail and to maximise the research publications that you can write in terms of being prepared in terms of your CV, and be prepared to watch for opportunities. Be networked. Spotting jobs in different countries, it requires networks. This is why organisations such as the Regional Studies Association, with its global reach, are important. You join in a network of global colleagues who are connected in a very wide way. So you need to know your audience and need to know the markets. But I can predict there's going to be quite an uneven geographical labour market emerging. So I think my advice is, if you end up working outside academia in applied research, don't forget the need to publish, so you can come back into an active HE environment at the appropriate time.
And linking back to that, so do you think it is usually good practice to email people in the department to ask for the job position and to get information from that department, or not? How would you?
Yeah, I think targeted. What I wouldn't want to advertise is, so you contact lots of departments without. Not if you have, of course, active links with members of staff, you can ask, are there any positions coming up, etc. And there might be some part-time postdoctoral research, kind of work coming up that can often be a foot in the door. Often when you see a job advertised, there's a 3-month process behind that in terms of scoping the adverts, getting it through the HR process. So being networked is critical. So I would advertise targeted kind of approaches if you want to do that. If there's a department you'd really like to join because your area of research and teaching fits with that, it's often important to build links with the early career researchers. So I'd probably encourage those early career connections, because you're more likely to get a reply rather than people in higher levels that won't reply to you because they're too busy and inundated with inquiries, etc. So try and build those ECR, connections where you can do.
And there's another question which instead is on a slightly different topic, and sometimes it's something I don't usually think of because I don't have these issues. But how would you deal with the visa requirements and visa permits or extension? This applies especially to overseas PhD students, for instance, that are looking for a job here. And the question is, how would you state that in advance, or would you wait for an offer to be made?
Often it's clear when you apply for a job, the pack that the university or research organisation centre actually send you. It's clear what the visa requirements are. Certainly the institutions I've worked in, there's been clear communication by the organisation, and there's also contact people in human resources that can help you with that. I've never experienced a problem in terms of not being able to find that information out. You'll often find, sitting on interview panels, we'll take the best person for the job. The best person will be, with that, and it's the best person in terms of the fit. Point that I was trying to emphasise before.
Okay. Then there are people asking you to do another presentation on how to get the job. So how to deal with a job interview. I don't know, maybe, you can do another, regarding time, you cannot do a proper presentation, but maybe you can give a few tips on what's important once you have reached the stage of the interview.
I do have another presentation, not for today, which is another 6 slides about the interview itself. That I can come back another time, because there are questions you can predict. Interviews go in predictable ways. Question 1 will be, why are you attracted to this role? There'll often be an interview will follow a presentation in the departments as well, what's called a stakeholder panel. I'm rather than kind of give a short answer, I'm prepared to talk about that in another session such as this, later in the month afterwards, because that's all I've done today is to take you up to the position of making an application and hopefully being shortlisted. There's another whole series of industrial questions in terms of handling the interview.
And I think that would be great, actually very interesting for me as well. There are many ways you can crash an interview, even unconsciously, so it's very interesting. So there's another question that comes back to the initial one on how you deal with basically the requirements you don't meet, the criteria you don't meet, and how do you deal with that. And in this case, it addresses what do you do when you are applying for a lectureship, for instance, and you don't have enough teaching experience, or you haven't had opportunities to gain it during your PhD. Now, this is very specific, but in general, what happens when you are missing something? And of course, you're not going to say out loud, I don't have that.
Yeah. But if you clearly don't have the essential and enough of the essential and desirables, you won't get shortlisted. In a sense, it depends on the field. Often, if you haven't got the experience, then you won't get shortlisted. But I think the lesson is, and I've been involved in conversations about this in my own institution, is even if you are on a stellar research trajectory, you need to be able to talk about teaching philosophy, because you'll get asked an interview. There'll be people at interview that'll talk about, even though you probably don't have extensive teaching experience, and you might have only done the odd guest lecture, you'll get asked, okay, what will your approach to teaching be? How will you engage the different groups of students? So it's expecting the fact of your, in a sense, you're trained to teach. What would your approach be? Often, if you don't meet the criteria, I wouldn't flag it on the covering letter. I'd play off where you clearly do meet the excellence criteria and go to town on those.
Okay, and I think I can compile perhaps the last questions, in one, and ask you in terms of number of publications that are expected from someone applying to a postdoc. What do you reckon it would be, and how many years of postdoctoral experience do you think there should be before applying to a lectureship? Now, I'm aware that it changes from the geography as well, but maybe you can give us a more comprehensive idea.
Yeah, so I think it's quantity, not quality for a postdoc. I would hire somebody that had only a couple of publications in the right area of the project that I want to work in. And also, I think it's the quality of those publications. It's the Q1, Q2 versus Q3, 4 quality higher mark. Because in a sense, if you're working on somebody else's projects, I think there's less pressure to be an independent research. It's more the fit. In terms of the length of postdoc, I've seen some of the most successful early career researchers have been involved in 2 years of postdoc experience. My own experience was I went from a PhD to a 3-year postdoc. I did 2 years of the postdoc only because I got my first lecturing position. Lots of my colleagues that I was working with and writing with in my early days of the career, which is something I would recommend, writing with early career researchers, normally did about 2 years worth of a postdoc. If you're a fast publisher and also have teaching experience during your PhD, it is feasible to go from a PhD to a first lectureship. That is, of course, possible. I wouldn't underestimate the importance of that postdoc training, because postdoc training allows you to get publications out with your project lead on the postdoc project you're working on, but also your CV publications as well. So in a sense, the postdoc market is one that I would really encourage looking at rather than going straight into a lectureship. It depends on the availability of jobs, of course, but also the areas that you'd like to work in at the same time. Okay.
There are, other questions as well, but I'm aware we reached the end of this webinar. Perhaps the last one, the very, very last one I would ask you is in regards the length of a CV and a cover letter. What do you think would be the ideal one? I know that there's a lot of questions about it, whether it's better to write something short and concise or to make sure that you include everything and it looks long so that you've done more things, basically.
I think the covering letter between between 2 and 3 pages, I think is critical in terms of having that detail.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the CV needs to cover key bases. It needs to talk about your education profile. It needs to talk about your excellence as a student yourself in terms of your undergraduate career. It needs to talk about your honours and awards. It's as long as your career narrative is, but it's key bases to cover. It needs to talk about your conference experience, your presentations, your teaching experience and your research experience, etc. Certainly a couple of pages high level probably wouldn't do it. It's as long as it needs to be, probably 5 pages minimum if you can, really. Mm-hmm. It depends how many excellence bases you want to hit, etc. But it depends. But what I can't underemphasise is the importance of that covering letter, because to a non-specialist audience, who won't understand some of the inner workings of your journal articles, etc., unless they've read them. The covering letter is your opportunity to sell yourself to a broad, general academic audience. It's that ability to pitch, but also to say that what your connections and fit is like, etc.
And from my experience, sometimes a cover letter can be also. There are certain jobs that ask you that tells you the way you should write that cover letter, and so it's not a tradition in the form of a traditional letter. It can be also answering specific question or compiling evidence on how you meet the criteria. So the essential is to make sure that you know how to show your experience, but then the way you assemble it might be different, and that depends from the job, really.
Yeah, correct, Stefania. But what's interesting is lots of people don't read the stuff. They don't read. It's the last minute, and I've done it myself. You play around with your CV, you apply for a job, and then you think, oh dear, I need to really, to rewrite that covering letter from the last job you got or didn't get. And they're often, by reading what is required, as you clearly say, some places do specify what's needed, and you need to touch those bases because that's how they shortlist. In order to get from the 30 to 40 to 50 people down to the 5 or 6 that will be interviewed, often you'll have a search committee with different people that don't know the ins and outs of your research area. They want to know, do you touch the bases on the 2 criteria, essential and desirable? The desirable, of course, are less critical than the essential, but that covering letter, if there are guidelines, please follow them.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Martin, for today's seminar, and we look forward to the next one then. Once we reach the shortlisting, how do we get the job? By performing well in the interview. I thank you very much to the audience as well, and as you said, if you have any more questions for Martin, you can get in touch with him through Regional Studies Association. And I think that's it for today. Thank you very much again, and goodbye.